There's something incredibly satisfying about putting a loudmouth in their place, especially when all it takes is calm confidence and a set of blueprints. Hello and welcome back to Karma Stories. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today's stories are from TraumatizeThemBack and they're all about unexpected comebacks. We have awkward encounters and full-on workplace disasters. People who learn the hard way not to mess with the wrong one. Let me know what you think of this subreddit in the comments down below, and let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Capital Spring 5984. Old school know-it-all got schooled with blueprints and facts. Back when I was still new to the construction field, I was the only woman on site, and fresh out of college. I was there to oversee structural integrity inspections for a new commercial build. Basically making sure nothing would come crashing down once the project was done. There was this older guy on the team named Rick. He clearly didn't like taking instructions from someone younger, let alone a woman. Every day, he'd make subtle digs calling me princess, rolling his eyes when I gave directions, and once even loudly joked to the crew that I probably got my degree from Pinterest. I kept my cool for weeks, did my job, and made sure every single note I logged was tight and accurate. Then came the foundation pour. Rick was supposed to handle it, but he made a huge error in the rebar placement. Major safety concern. I double-checked the specs, took photos, and called it out during the inspection walk. Rick tried to argue in front of everyone, saying, "I've been doing this longer than she's been alive. She's wrong." So I calmly pulled out the blueprints, my inspection notes, and the regulation binder and walked everyone through the exact point of failure. The foreman looked at Rick and said, "She's right, you could have cost us a lawsuit." The look on Rick's face? Priceless. He didn't say a word the rest of the day, and from that moment on, he never questioned me again. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Todd W1968. It says, "So, could you say that Rick had been doing this wrong longer than you've been alive?" Another commenter down below called Break My Limits Please said, "Construction is rough for women to break into. Stories like this show how professionalism can shut down egos." So I don't work in construction, and admittedly, that's not one of the jobs I've done out of the many jobs that I've done. But I can tell you for sure, when somebody says, "I've been doing it like this for 20 years, without telling you that they've updated with the times, that's pretty scary. Besides that this story definitely deserves a screw you, Rick, I think we could say that this guy got Rick-rolled. Sometimes people really don't know when to stop talking, and when they do it at the worst possible time, the silence that follows is absolutely deafening. This story comes to us from Lady Datura 9497. Thanks for the unsolicited advice on my dying father. Got a new coworker a couple months back for reasons he was obsessed with golfing. After a couple of days of working in each other's vicinity, he decided it was time to get to know his new coworker, me. It's pretty basic small talk at first, but eventually he starts talking about golf. It's a pleasant enough conversation, and at some point, he asks if I ever played. I said no, but that my dad loved to golf. He asked how often my dad golfed, and I gave the answer that he went weekly until he got sick. He can't let some sickness get him down, gotta power through, that's how you get better. After a while of me dancing around the details, while he goes on about how my dad needed to get back out there, I finally just tell him that my dad has cancer. He can't let that cancer beat him. My aunt had breast cancer, and she never stopped doing the things she loved. My dad was diagnosed very recently, so this happened when that wound was very fresh. I interrupted my new friend and told him that, well, it's a little hard for him to get around now, what with the seizure he had that took control over the left side of his body, and the surgery he had recently for his stage 4 brain cancer. I didn't hear another word from him the rest of my shift. He quit before my next one. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called the Uncle Awesome 07. It says, another example of people thinking they're helping but can't read the room. Sorry you went through that. Another commenter down below called the Jovo59 said, hugs from a mom. How horrible. I'm sorry about your dad's condition. I wish I could hug you in person. Cancer acts differently in everyone. Keeping your chin up has never been written as a prescription. If I were talking to somebody and they told me that one of my loved ones just needed to power through their cancer and get back out golfing, I don't know if I'd be able to hold myself back. I might actually get violent, and I'm not a violent person. You can tell that the only kind of cancer this guy's ever seen in one of his loved ones is one that was on the fringe, one that wasn't as bad as most other people get, and so they don't have any experience with just how bad it can get. I've lost too many people in my life from cancer. It sucks, and telling them to power through would be one of the worst things you could do. This one started with a simple road trip for work and ended with a full-blown HR meltdown. Some people just don't know when to stop talking, until it costs them everything. This story comes to us from Jesus Is My Job. Her big mouth got her fired. I was listening to Malicious Compliance, and this story from 20 years ago came to mind. Now, I wasn't very malicious in my compliance, it was more like just doing what she said. Let me explain. Okay, here's the backstory. I was a 24-year-old African-American female working at a since-closed secondary after high school for-profit institution. My coworker Big Mouth was a Caucasian woman in her late 50s. This job is very sales-heavy, and we spent most of our time on the phone calling leads that were provided to us by the company. Our director was famous for saying, on the phone or on the bus, at least twice a day. The company also spent a lot of time pushing us to generate our own leads, or PDLs, personally developed leads, namely because these forms of leads didn't cost them anything. Well, since I spent about 3 years working for a community college prior to this job, I knew I could generate leads by visiting the various college fairs at the community colleges in my area, about 5 in total. So for weeks on in the fall and the spring, I would leave the office and head out to each of my campuses. Since I lived in a coastal city, this meant that most of my travel would require me to use the Pacific Coast Highway, which is famous for its panoramic ocean views. I loved those drives, and I was on the clock, so it was a win-win. Big Mouth started to notice the pickup in my activity due to the PDLs that my college visits were making for me, and I got to spend all this time away from the office. And she got an idea. She asked both our director and me if she could tag along on my trips. Surely there were enough people at these fairs, and she could help me since 2 heads were better than 1. I didn't have a problem with it, and we headed off to our first joint fair. Since I had all the table equipment in my car, I asked if she wanted to carpool. The college was a good hour away. She agreed, and we headed up the coast. We made polite chit-chat for most of the ride. We didn't know very much about each other. She told me how she grew up in some town in Massachusetts, and all about her brothers and sisters, and I in turn told her about where I grew up and siblings and such. We both asked a few follow-up questions, and then she asked me the question. She wanted to know what I was. Sadly, she was not the first person to ask me this question, so I instantly knew what she meant. I am African American, but let's say a very fair or light shade. My mother was half Caucasian, and my father was half Native American, both of their other halves being African American. I also have light brown or hazel colored eyes. When I was born, they were blue. So yeah, this was not uncommon territory for me. I didn't want her to feel bad for asking, so I did my rehearsed explanation about my parents' genealogy. Although this alone couldn't really explain why I looked like I did, because my younger brother had the same parents and was quite a few shades darker than I, but I digress. She asked me if this caused me problems growing up, and I said yeah, and told her about the endless teasing that I endured in school, and that my classmates used to call me a mutt, a term that was used to describe a dog that was mixed of various breeds. I told her that the term was hurtful, but I got through it. She listened to this story and then turns to me and says, "That's terrible, but well, at least they didn't call you the N-word." I froze. I was shocked, and she just kinda giggled. I honestly can't tell you what I did or said, or even how my car drove itself to my campus, but suddenly we were there. I decided to put this to the back of my thoughts for now because I didn't know how to deal with it, and I had 4 hours of a college fair to deal with. So I set up our table and started my work. She wasn't too bad at the fair. It was obvious that she didn't know how to talk with the students, but she was still able to generate a few PDLs. Towards the end of the fair, I decided not to deal with what she said on the way home. I figured that it wasn't the right time to say anything, and besides, I was tired. The ride back was quiet. We didn't say much to each other. When we got close to the campus, Big Mouth remarked that our previous conversation was funny, and I should tell it to my friends. So I did. When we got back to the campus, I kind of just sat in my office and tried to put all the pieces of the conversation together. I ultimately decided that due to differences in where we grew up and our age difference, she was just tone deaf about the use of that word. I didn't know how she could be, but it was the only explanation that made any kind of sense. Still confused, I spoke out to one of my coworkers who was a friend, as I tried to decide what to do. I was perfectly okay with just dropping the whole thing, but my friend brought up a valid point. You see, most of the students on this campus were people of color, a mix of second and third generation Latino and African American. He said that if she was that tone deaf, or she didn't think that using that word was wrong, she might say it to a student or another coworker. He was right, so I went in to speak to our director. This was not uncommon because I usually debriefed him after a college fair. I started out just giving him the normal rundown, and then I told him about our conversation. I slowly watched his smile turn into an inquisitive look, and then into a frown. I told him that I wasn't making a complaint and I didn't want her to get in trouble, but that it might be best that he spoke to her about it so she knew not to say it again. He said okay, and I went back to my office. About 30 minutes later, he called Big Mouth in. He gave her an opportunity to debrief about how the college fair was for her, and then with no prompting from him, she told him about our conversation. In her retelling of the story, she quoted every word that we said, including the N-word. The director told Big Mouth very sternly that she was not to use that word. She replied to his reprimand by repeating the word to explain that she wasn't using the word negatively. The conversation grew louder and louder as our director tried in vain to explain that she should stop saying that word. This might be a good time to tell you that our director was too African American. Big Mouth tried again to explain why N-word wasn't a bad word and it depended on how and who you say it to. My director asked her to leave his office. He then made a call to HR. A short time later, I was called into his office with a woman from HR on the phone, and she asked me to tell her what was said. I told her, and she apologized, and I was sent home early. The next day when I arrived to work, there sat a potted plant with a note from Big Mouth in my office. I'm still confused by why she bought me the plant. Her buying that plant was even more confusing to me than anything she said. In any case, on the note there was an apology. I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was along the lines of, "Sorry, I said what I said." My director called me in moments later, and I was excused for the day. He explained that Big Mouth was fired, and they decided that it was best if I wasn't there as she moved out of her office. By this time, the entire office had heard what Big Mouth said, and they were very upset. I honestly felt bad for her and still do. It's like she just didn't get it. I was compliant in telling the story, but I wasn't trying to be malicious at all. I heard from a woman in the office that still spoke with Big Mouth that she found another job in the educational field and that she was doing okay. Hopefully, she learned not to use that word. Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called Working Out Slayer. It says, "I just don't get why it tickled her so much that she wanted both of you to share that conversation." Opie responded and said, "Yo, do you know how many sleepless nights that observation has cost me? Like seriously, what the F?" Another commenter down below called Manchi Sind said, "A potted plant is really a weird thing to hand out as an apology. I'd probably choose chocolate, if anything but a card." Opie responded and said, "Yeah, dropping the hard R and then turning to Hallmark to say, 'my bad,' is crazy work. Even now, I was so confused by the entire thing. The look on my boss's face was priceless." Okay, so where did this person grow up so sheltered that they thought that was okay? Oy. OP, the part in this story I didn't like was that you were willing to let it go. And I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you brought it up with your superiors and that the issue was dealt with, because the only way that people ever learn is if something comes down on them for their actions. A creepy customer thought he was being charming until one comment took things way too far. But she didn't run. She hit back with a line so cold, he walked himself right out the door. This story comes to us from Worldly Humor 6342. Hit on me, I hit you harder. Essential context, something you should know about my home country, Australia. One of our most prolific serial killers was named Ivan Milat, and his MO was to abduct backpackers, take them to the Belangelo State Forest, torture them, and then take their lives. The story. I work at a small boutique store selling all manner of secondhand goods. One day, a rather unkempt fella walks in. I'm talking long, scraggly mullet hairstyle, chest puffed out like God's gift to women. I did my usual greeting of, "Good afternoon, sir, how are you today?" He stops for a few seconds, cocks his head, and replies with, "Sir? I've never been called sir before," walks one lap around the front counter in the middle of the store, and out the door without actually looking at anything. Odd. A week or two go by, and he comes in again. "Good afternoon, how are you today?" He says, "Not bad, thanks," and proceeds with his 15-second lap of honor, and out the door. Odd. Every so often, rinse and repeat, until the morning of this event. At opening time, I unlock the door and prop it open using my foot. I turn to grab our A-frame sign to take it outside. As I turn back, there he was, standing just outside the doorway, blocking my path. With surprise, I wished him a good morning. He then said, "I've got bad news for you, love. I'm moving away very soon, so I won't be able to come and visit you anymore." With as much sarcasm as I could muster, I replied with, "Aww." He stepped right onto the threshold of the door, patted my shoulder and said, "I'll have to grab your number so you can come around for coffee before I move." Frozen with fear and revolt, I let him know that I am happily spoken for, and I don't mix work and social. He stepped inside and headed over to the men's department. I put the sign out. As I returned to the shop, I bolted for the back room and out of his sight. As I did so, I heard him call out, "Or there's the Belangelo State Forest." I turned around and froze, unable to comprehend what this slimy prick just said. Again, I mustered all sarcasm that I could and replied cheerily with, "Ooh, camping. I haven't done that in so long. It'll be fun." Turned on my heel and continued to the safety of my back room. 2 steps later, I stopped and turned around and delivered my final blow. Actually, funny fact about Belangelo State Forest, and I'm glad the police didn't work it out, Ivan Milat was my fall guy. Turned back to the back room once more, heard the door chime, and realized I was alone. Some people don't need to be yelled at or argued with, they just need one perfectly timed sentence to haunt them for the rest of the week. If you enjoyed these clever comebacks and brutal shutdowns, be sure to follow the podcast so you never miss a story. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know. I thank you for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.